Tonight, spending cuts and tax rises. The Chancellor signals that next month's budget is going to be painful. As figures show the economy flatlined in July, Rachel Reeves insists to Sky News that painful measures are needed to get stability, which she says will then lead to growth. Meanwhile, the former Conservative Minister Nadhim Zahawi tells me he's worried the Chancellor's making life more difficult by herself by scaring off the rich.
People are leaving the country who are what I would call high talent.
Also tonight, after last night's big debate, Donald Trump calls into a morning TV show to declare victory. But it's Kamala Harris whose poll ratings are up. And after Taylor Swift comes out to back the current Vice President, we'll look at celeb endorsements, which perhaps haven't gone quite as well. Backing me tonight, Lord Blunkett and Dame Andrea Leadsom, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Growth, that magic word that all politicians are obsessed with. And you can see why, because if the economy starts growing, then suddenly everything gets a lot easier. Higher growth means more jobs, which means more lovely tax income, and that means more lovely money for public services. So if somehow you get growth to tick up just a few percentage points, then suddenly all those numbers in the economic forecast start looking a lot easier. And you might be able to cut tax or build more hospitals or whatever it is you're prioritising. So that's why at the centre of Keir Starmer's economic strategy, like so many governments before, is that magic word, growth. But there's one problem. You can't just click your fingers and get growth. Just ask Liz Truss. And the figures out today are pretty depressing reading. Growth is flatlining. It's basically one big pancake. Now, obviously, you can't blame the guy who's only been in power for 2 months. Planning reform and the rest won't start making a difference just yet. But today's sluggish growth figures really matter because they don't make those sums any easier. Brace yourself for a very difficult budget next month. And of course, it goes without saying that at some point, blaming the last administration for poor growth just won't cut it. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that Keir Starmer's premiership rests on getting that slippery, that ethereal thing called growth to, well, start growing. So here's Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso, who has tonight's first report on the economy.
Competition, company and a little gentle exercise.
Oh, look at that.
There's much to recommend indoor bowls, but there's another reason. It's warm. And these Oxford pensioners are deeply unimpressed at losing their winter fuel payments.
Rachel Reeves now taking from the pensioners. Old people come in here to bowl 2-3 times a week because they don't have to heat their homes.
The last government didn't do a lot, did they? But I feel this government is more for the unions, and for some reason it's against us, and I don't know why.
30 miles away at Silverstone, meeting students the morning after a Commons rebellion, the woman responsible told me she had no regrets.
Is this really what you want people to think of as a Reeves chancellor, someone who takes money from the most vulnerable?
We faced a situation where there was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances when I became Chancellor. These decisions were not decisions that I expected to make. They weren't decisions that I wanted to make, but they were the right decisions in the circumstances that we faced.
With the economy stalling in July for a second consecutive month, the Chancellor will need companies like this game studio to deliver growth. But they want some stimulus, which comes at a price.
You look at a country like Germany has already dedicated 70 million euros to support games projects. So what we'd like to see is the government increase the games fund so that we can take more risks, we can be more creative and we can be more innovative.
But the Chancellor's message is deliberately downbeat. Her challenge to kickstart an economy stuck in neutral.
Rachel Reeves says she wants to deliver growth at the same time as imposing new workers' rights, regulations on businesses and, in all probability, increasing taxes to bail out the public finances. The budget will tell us if she can do all of that and get the economy back on track. You can cut spending, you can increase borrowing, you can raise taxes. Isn't the truth? You are going to have to do all three.
I've been really honest that there are difficult decisions to come in the budget on spending, on taxation and welfare. After the mess that the previous government created with the public finances in the state that they are in, that was inevitable.
2 months after the election, the Chancellor is playing a long game, calculating that pay now will deliver a winning hand. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Well, let's just take a moment to reiterate those figures that confirm the UK economy flatlining once again. So you can see there the Office for National Statistics saying that the UK economy unexpectedly, I should say, grew a whopping 0% in July. The forecast had been that we'd see some slight growth of 0.2%. And it was a pretty similar story in June, where the economy also, there you go, failed to grow at all. And that means the last time the economy actually grew was all the way back in May, where it did actually grow there at 0.4% in May. Well, let's talk about the politics now, shall we? We're joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Look, you can't blame Keir Starmer for growth in July, obviously, but it's a problem for this government.
Yeah, there's a baseline upon which they can presumably only improve. But there's a tension, Sophie, I think, at the heart of this government. And I thought you got a little bit of that in Paul's film there, which there are two things that often sound quite similar, but they're not. Rachel Reeves is emphasising fiscal discipline, sorting out the books. But there's also the promise by Keir Starmer that growth is this government's top priority. And whilst I think this government would try and argue that you get growth by sorting out the public finances, the two are not entirely compatible. And this is where the budget on October the 30th is going to be particularly interesting, because they've got to make some choices between things. The kind of savings that Rachel Reeves is looking for, in large part, the Treasury tell me, they want to get from basically cuts to what's called capital budgets. Now, that's the kind of money that you put towards roads and hospitals and things that you build. That's the kind of stuff that the Treasury want to cut back on, but that's the very same stuff that causes and helps and encourages growth. So which is it? Is fiscal discipline more important or is genuinely promoting growth, even if that means spending a bit more money? And we saw this before the summer when Rachel Reeves did the winter fuel payment, but also can things like the A303 down to Cornwall, the upgrade of that road, in the bin to save some money. But that's not going to help growth in the southwest. Are we going to get more of that kind of approach on October the 30th?
It'll be really interesting to see, won't it? You'll be talking there about choices, and of course, one of the choices, the early choices, the controversial choices that Keir Starmer made was to scrap winter fuel payments to the majority of pensioners. It feels like day two. What's your sense about how much pressure he's under?
Well, look, I think that a rebellion of one, which is what it was yesterday, is never going to scare the horses that much kind of on the surface. But I think this whole episode involving winter fuel payments has sent a chill through the Labour Party. One person said there's only so long that Keir Starmer can fight against his party while governing. And I think they have to be a little bit careful, because although many people held their nose and voted with the rest of the government in the lobbies yesterday, they're nervous about taking too much money away from vulnerable people when they thought the promise of this election was to sort out the cost of living. Keir Starmer was on the receiving end of questions from Rishi Sunak about whether or not he would come clean about the impact of this policy. Work was done. I know work was done on the impact inside government to work out whether or not the winter fuel payment change was the right one. And whilst there might not be a sort of a discrete document that they're willing to release, that work was all done before they made the decision back in July. It doesn't sound like they're on the cusp of releasing it. The problem is that there are a lot of people who are very loyal to Labour caught up in the group that have lost out. And that kind of thing is costing a lot of goodwill inside the Labour Party. There is a limit to how much more he can do that and keep his own side in check. The ultimate problem is he might have a massive, massive majority, but Keir Starmer does feel the pressure. But there was another criticism from Rishi Sunak, and this one, I think, is even harder for Keir Starmer to answer.
He's the one that's taking money away from pensioners on £13,000, Mr. Speaker. But this has got nothing to do with the public finances. His own Chancellor just this morning, his MPs may not have been listening to her, his own Chancellor this morning admitted that she would prefer it if this policy didn't even raise any money, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the government would not have made this decision without an impact analysis. And yesterday, the Energy Minister confirmed that.
That there is tricky. Let me just explain very quickly what Rishi Sunak's saying. Rachel Reeves is trying to encourage pensioners to take up pension credit. If they haven't already, there are 800,000 who could do it and therefore also qualify for winter fuel allowance. But if all 800,000 did that, it would wipe out the savings. This measure was only done to save money. And Keir Starmer's being asked, and Rachel Reeves being asked, well, if you're happy for there not to be any savings, why are we embarking this in the first place? Those kinds of contradictions, I didn't hear an answer from Keir Starmer on. They are tough.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, earlier today, I spoke to the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, including a brief stint as Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi. Thank you so much for being on the programme. I know you're here to talk about your book, but I did just want to ask you about the big question it feels that our country is facing right now, the economy. You're a former Chancellor, you're a successful businessman. What do you make of how Rachel Reeves is doing?
I worry. I think Rachel is incredibly talented and she will look at the data and it feels like a couple of things that are headwinds heading our way. One is wage inflation. So obviously some of the public sector wage settlements, I think, are out of kilter to where you want inflation to be, which you want to get back to target of 2%. And what the new government has been agreeing with, the train drivers and others is way above that. So it will put more pressure on the Bank of England in terms of holding it back from lowering interest rates. And therefore, cost of living, people's mortgages will, remain challenging. The other thing I worry about is we are importing high levels of, and it was, by the way, this is not a political point because it was equally a challenge for the previous Conservative government. We're importing high levels of low-skilled labour. So you look at the net migration numbers at 740,000, of which, obviously the illegal crossings is the one that sort of poisons the well of goodwill with the public, but it's about 40,000. But the big number is the net migration numbers. And we are now exporting, or people are leaving the country who are what I would call high talent. Now, obviously financial success or being a millionaire is not the only proxy for talent. I know that, but it's a pretty good proxy, and we are now probably only second to China.
So do you think that
of people who are leaving the country?
Do you think wealthy people are leaving the UK because they're worried about tax rises?
I think it's a combination of, right? It's tax rises.
That, yes, yeah.
And I just think now that we've left the EU, if you look at the G7, 3 of the G7 are in Europe, the 4th is America. These are continental economies, and you can make an argument that if you want to trade there, you have to live with what we apply in terms of taxation. We're now a mid-sized market, right, with 70 million people. So the competition will come from the UAE, from Singapore. So we've got to be much more cognizant of the fact that we've got to be attractive for talent.
There'll be some people who'll be listening to this saying, it's a bit rich coming from someone who was part of the last administration when there were huge strikes, which is why many people think that public sector pay rises are the only way to try and stop strikes that were embedded in the economy before. There was a huge tax burden under the Conservative administration and record levels of migration. It's a bit rich.
And as I just spoke about, I said, this isn't a political point. We had a similar challenge, although I have to say credit to Rishi Sunak is that he held firm on dealing with inflation, on fiscal responsibility, which is the bit that the government controls, versus monetary policy, which is the Bank of England. And he tried to hold firm on that and explain to the nation that why it's important to be quite firm with some of the union demands and say, look, we can't give you what you're asking for because it will just fuel inflation, which hurts everybody, because if the inflation remains high in the economy, it harms not just public sector workers, but private sector workers as well. So you're right, it was a challenge for us.
I'm keen to talk a bit about the challenges for your party, because you're now in opposition, kind of wrestling with the future of the Conservative Party. I noted you donated £20,000 to Robert Jenrick's leadership campaign through your company. It's publicly declared. I guess
It's my wife, so she's
Zahawi and Zahawi.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Does that mean that you're backing him for the leadership?
I haven't declared for any candidate. And
now's your chance.
Look, I will wait to party conference. I am a mere foot soldier for the party now. I want to see.
That could be a few awkward conversations if your wife's donated £20,000 to Robert Jenrick.
But look, ultimately, we live in a democracy. My book talks about coming out of a country run by a single party and Saddam Hussein, and people have free choices. But what I would say, I think Rob has run a brilliant campaign. I think we've got some very good talent in the other candidates, whether it's Tom Tugendhat, James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch. The candidate that can demonstrate to me that they can unite the party, because the reason I think we were thrown out of government is because the nation could see that we formed a circular firing squad. You know, we got to a stage where Conservatives were going on TV, on your programmes, talking about the 5 families meeting at midnight in a smoke-filled room. You know, your viewers who are having to struggle with a mortgage payment and the cost of living, you know, would be incensed to think that the natural party of government, you know, the last 100 years, we've governed for 80% of that 100 years, speaking as if there's in some episode of The Sopranos, you know, as if we're some... I mean, it was insanity. And I think if we are not disciplined and we don't get back to unity, then that void will be filled by another party that's far more disciplined and focused on wanting to win votes.
Let's talk about your book. You've written a book, The Boy from Baghdad. You talk in it as well about your own family's experience finding refuge in the UK. And you obviously love Britain, but I was quite, you know, you do also speak about, I guess, some of the difficult moments that you had arriving as that boy from
really hard.
Baghdad.
Yeah, totally right.
And we've spoken about it before, I know.
Yeah, we have. Your first question is you sort of understand that your father had to flee, that you live in a state that had a dictator, but you still, at the age of 11, I've got an 11-year-old now, you formed, you know, a circle of friends, relationships, and it's really hard to be wrenched away from that, especially to you know, a strange place where you don't really speak the language very well. And so the early days and weeks, you know, I felt, you know, really depressed in many ways. It was cold, miserable, and hard. But children are malleable. You very quickly adjust. Within 8-12 months, I'd picked up the language. I talk about, you know, picking up the Sun newspaper and you know, beginning to learn the language through the tabloids rather than... I tried the Telegraph and I couldn't at the time get my head around some of the columns. But and then, of course, you begin to realise that in this country, if you share with people, adults, your fears, your hope, your aspirations, there are lots of people who will mentor you and give you a leg up, and you end up, you know, as I did, becoming an engineer and then building a great business that became a unicorn, and then obviously entering Parliament and then ending up as Second Lord of the Treasury. My cousin, by the way, who's slightly older than me, my first cousin, ended up in a very different place. He was conscripted to the front line for the Saddam's adventure, where Iran-Iraq war, got taken prisoner of war by the Iranians. For 12 years, we couldn't find him. The Red Crescent, which is the equivalent of the Red Cross, didn't have his name. The Iranians wouldn't list him. 12 years on, he turns up with a wife with now... He left with 2 babies, with 2 children that were sort of teenagers, or you know, 13, 14 years old. That could have so easily have been me. So every morning when I wake up, I just think I must be blessed to have landed on these shores.
I'm just wondering, because one of the most difficult things that we've experienced as a nation, we saw in the summer with the riots. How did the boy from Baghdad feel when you witnessed what was happening on the streets of Britain?
Yeah, and I wrote about this in the Times newspaper. I felt a couple of things. One, that we need to be intolerant of intolerance. We're the most tolerant nation, in my view, on earth. And in many ways colourblind. You know, the people of Stratford-on-Avon have voted for Nadhim Zahawi, a boy from Baghdad, and every election I increase my majority. They are sort of 96, 97% white, affluent, you know, farming community.
Can I come in? Because you give me quite a sort of academic answer to this, like a politician's answer. But the question is, how did you feel when you saw it?
Terrible, because I begin to worry that the fabric of society, the values that we all share, doesn't matter what your background, your ethnicity is, was being pulled apart. And I think the reason I say to you about, intolerant of intolerance is what we can't allow to happen in our country is minority groups will hijack, in my view, a religion, a great religion like Islam, and preach hatred and political Islam, which is deeply harmful. I've always been an advocate of prescribing the Muslim Brotherhood, for example. Other Muslim nations have done that and are now in a period of incredible prosperity and enlightenment, like the UAE. I talk about in my
So do you blame
work.
that for the riots then?
Well, part of that is people, immigrant stock, Muslim communities we'll be looking at saying, I don't recognise that as part of my community, part of my religion. But also the other side, by the way, we must be intolerant of, fascist, people who are clearly racist, coming out and taking the law into their own hands. That is equally wrong. What you want is a society that pushes back on that behaviour as well.
You said earlier in the interview that you didn't read The Telegraph when you first came to the UK because the columns were perhaps too long for you. Now, just pretend the cameras aren't here, the mics aren't on, if you will. What's going on with The Telegraph? Are you bidding for The Telegraph?
So I think The Telegraph is a wonderful
You read it
newspaper.
Now, then.
I read it, I have the app, I check it daily. There's a process. It would be absolutely wrong. I was a businessman before becoming a politician to comment on that process because it is confidential. There are a number of bidders. I've always said publicly it would be an incredible honour for me and a real privilege if I were ever to chair the Telegraph or be involved with the Telegraph. But there is a process, and you've seen Redbird IMI, I think only yesterday, sold The Spectator, another great magazine.
So
to
Paul Marshall, of course, the owner of GB News, bought The Spectator for £100 million. So you got any comment on that? He's rumoured, of course, to be bidding for the Telegraph too.
Well, I think that is absolute credit to Fraser Nelson and Andrew Neil to take a magazine which, not a long time ago, was valued at about £20 million.
Andrew Neil wasn't that happy about it, was he?
To 100 million.
Tweeted about it.
And I think Andrew would have liked to see a different outcome. He's a friend and, of course, a wonderful interrogator of politicians. But I think, good luck to the team there. They are an incredibly talented team, and I think equally talented than the Telegraph.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to
Thank you for having me.
My interview there with Nadhim Zahawi. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? Former Home Secretary Lord Blunkett and the former Business Secretary Andrea Leadsom. Great to have you both on the programme today. Lord Blunkett, to you first, because I just wonder how you think Labour is doing with the problems that it faces. We heard Sam outlining some of them earlier. Flatlining growth, terrible public finances, creaking public sector. What do you think they should be doing?
Well, first, great interview. Just done. Great backstory for Nadine. Don't want to tell you your job, and you won't tell me mine, but I was sorry you didn't ask him whether he was going to leave the country, because clearly he isn't. So I just wanted to put that to rest. People will not leave the country if we are backing entrepreneurs, innovators, people who are going to invest. So I think we want to be clear about that.
Do you think it's scaremongering then from him?
I think there's scaremongering going on because we don't know until the 30th of October what Rachel Reeves is going to announce. We've made it clear that certain things are off the table. I'm in favour of fair taxation for those who can carry it. I wouldn't be in favour of something that went out of its way to discourage entrepreneurs and those who are prepared to invest, because that's the way we'll contribute to growth. But you asked me a question, and I'll answer it straight. Sam Coates highlighted a genuine contradiction. There is a real challenge when a Chancellor decides, as Rachel has, that she wants to balance the books in year. We're not talking about the gap that existed when the election was called back in May, but the income and expenditure gap that we have in this current financial year. I'm a believer in long-termism, and Andrea Leadsom and I have worked on something long-term, which is called investment in small children. And the successor to Sure Start, which Andrea's championed. I only mention it because I do have a fear. And the fear has been there with the orthodoxy of the Treasury for 100 years. Nothing new about this. The Treasury's desire to rein in and to do it on a short-term basis, from the first Labour Chancellor, Philip Snowden, who quit to the national government in the 30s, all the way through to when we went to the IMF in 1976 and humiliated Dennis Healey and found out afterwards it wasn't necessary. So my concern is not that it's right for Rachel to want to develop the message of stability and to get the balance correct in terms of income and expenditure. My worry is about the investment needed for that growth. And that means not cutting major investment programmes, which have an enormously long lead-in programme. I'm not going to tell Rachel what to do. She worked at the Bank of England. She's taken enormous advice in the lead-up to the election. But if we mean growth, then we've got to invest in it.
That's really interesting to hear. It does feel that there is that evergreen problem in politics, that kind of tension, as Lord Blunkett was pointing out, between fiscal discipline, perhaps Treasury orthodoxy, and then also doing the long-term radical thinking that perhaps the country needs.
Well, what's very clear, in my view, is that you are not going to get growth by scrapping infrastructure investment. And actually, I recall back in 2010 when the Conservative coalition came in, and I was on the Treasury Select Committee, and in that very first budget, the coalition decided to cancel a lot of capital investment, because, again, it was even more of an existential risk to the economy then. And they very soon realised, actually, therein lies the path to the opposite of growth. So if you don't have the infrastructure, if you scrap the road investments, the infrastructure investments that people need in order to be attracted into the country, to invest in the country, and so on, then you won't get growth. And I'm afraid I fear that that's the path we're on. I also think that, Rachel Reeves she's made some very clear decisions to give 15% pay rise to train drivers who've already said they're going to strike again next year, so what's the point of that? That's a £9 billion decision on public sector workers. So talking about the need to balance the books in year is an extraordinarily difficult thing when you're also spending money on GB energy, you're shutting down the North Sea, so we're going to be more exposed to overseas imports of oil and gas. I mean, all of these decisions, these are highly political decisions, not one of which is going to create growth.
You were shaking your head to some of that.
Well, I am, because on the pay increases, you have to presume that the outgoing government believed that they would have to at least partly honour, if not fully honour, the pay review bodies, which is what we've agreed to do. They were established in order to have a sensible process. The last government actually indicated what they wanted from the pay review bodies. They've reported in all these major sectors, from doctors and nurses all the way through judges and the armed forces. On the issue of the train drivers, it's the marginal cost that's having to be met by settling the strike, not the whole amount of the pay increase, because the pay increase that was on the table, of course, was included in the calculation. So there's a lot of nonsense being talked at the moment. But I agree with Andrea about the infrastructure. I've said so. That's why I was against the austerity measures from 2010. When George Osborne cut 30 billion out of public expenditure, it had a dramatic impact on growth. It had a dramatic impact on the social well-being of the people we care about. So, yeah, let's not repeat what the Tories did in the coalition from 2010.
Yet, it is the fact that what Labour coming in have inherited was the fastest growing economy in the G7.
Well, it's just
and
flatlining.
you and Sam and David are all agreeing it's just flatlining. But there is such a thing as business confidence, as you know, David, as you know, as
it didn't
Sam
flatline
knows.
between June and the end of July.
No, but the fact of the matter is, Labour have come in to a massive majority and business confidence has been hit by that.
Okay.
And businesses have said they are very concerned about what Labour will do with businesses.
OK, we've got a bit of agreement on the infrastructure spending, a lot of agreement on the early years, but perhaps a little bit of disagreement on the rest of it.
We wouldn't be opposite
exactly.
parties if not.
That's too right. Thank you very much indeed. You are watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. She came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. Should Donald Trump be afraid of little old Tay-Tay? And a ban on no-fault evictions and a right to have pets. The long-awaited Renters' Rights Bill is laid in Parliament. We'll take you through the details.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that?
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. Now, the long-awaited Renters' Rights Bill will be introduced to Parliament today and aiming to strengthen protection for tenants in an increasingly volatile market. Now, it builds on the previous Conservative government's Renters' Reform Bill. It actually ran out of time to progress through Parliament before the July election. But one of the big things in the new bill is legislation to ban no-fault evictions, are also known as Section 21 evictions. Successive Conservative housing secretaries and prime ministers promised to ban them, but the work kept becoming delayed. Now, currently, Section 21 notices allow landlords to terminate tenancies without giving a reason. But under the new plans, landlords will need to provide a valid cause to end a tenancy early. And the bill will also abolish those evictions for both new and existing tenancies. Right, let's take a look now at some of the other measures in the Renters' Rights Bill. So, extending Awab's law. Now, this is named after the toddler who died after exposure to mould in his family's home. It's an awful story. You'll probably remember the little boy's face. That's going to be extended to the private rented sector. The bill will also apply a decent home standard. And that means any landlords who fail to address serious hazards could be fined. And rental bidding wars will also be banned. So, in other words, meaning that landlords, letting agents publish an asking rent for their property. There's also a ban on in-tenancy rent increases being written into contracts. Landlords will only be able to raise the rent once a year and at the market rate. The bill abolishes blanket bans on people receiving benefits or with children, and it also gives tenants strengthened rights to ask to keep a pet in their home. The Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycock, posted this to X earlier. It's a picture of the Renters' Rights Bill, and he said, time to do what the previous Tory government would not and level decisively the playing field between landlord and tenant. He spoke to Sky News this morning.
It's an important piece of legislation. It's been over 30 years since we fundamentally altered the relationship between landlord and tenant. As you will know, far too many tenants live day in, day out with the knowledge that they might be evicted with little notice, with minimal justification. And a very significant minority of them live in very substandard accommodation because of fear of making a complaint will lead to a retaliatory eviction. So we've got to give them the rights and protections they deserve.
Right, let's bring our duo in again. Andrea, the Conservatives said they were going to do this. What stops you?
Well, the bill, as you see, is there and good to go, and that's obviously under the last government. And as I understand it, I wasn't close to it at the time, but as I understand it, there is this very, very real concern about the impact it will have on the availability of rental properties. And so I believe that it was the consultation to try and ensure that we wouldn't actually, therefore, be leaving many more people with nowhere to live, and that would be a disaster. We know there's a real shortage of decent, affordable housing, and it was that genuine desire. So, I mean, we've not seen exactly which bits of the bill Labour intend to bring forward, what amendments there might be, and so on. So, I mean, all of the items that you just mentioned there, those were all intended under the Conservative drafting of the bill, and I would support all of those. But obviously, we don't want less availability.
What do you make of this, Lord Blunkett? Is it something that you welcome?
Yes, it's a good piece of legislation. As Andrea said, we've got to see some of the detail. I think we must reassure landlords, decent landlords, which there are across the country, that if someone trashes their dwelling or simply refuses to pay the rent, that they are going to be, that the landlord will be protected from those people, because otherwise people will quit the sector, and that wouldn't be a good thing for anyone. And then we need to work out how the really important addition about landlords hiking the rent will actually affect people. Because at the moment, you sign a contract for a year or 2 years. At the end, the landlord has perfect right to increase the rent. Now, if there's going to be any restrictions on that, years and years back when I was young, there were rent controls. They will need to have to be worked through, because it's got to be fair to the tenant and secure for the tenant, and it's got to be fair to the landlord, because we're not suggesting that there shouldn't be a private rented sector.
And David's absolutely right. It's got to be very carefully done. And certainly I recall, as a constituency MP, a case of a couple who were living in private rented accommodation, and they were having the most awful time with neighbours for a particular reason, and they wanted to move and they were unable to move, so they were stuck in their tenancy. So it can cut both ways. It's actually a very complicated situation where you don't want either landlords to be stuck with problem tenants or tenants to be stuck somewhere which is just untenable for them.
Do you think landlords get a bit of a bad rep sometimes, Lord Blunkett?
Well, I think some landlords, we've
some
had
deserve
examples,
it,
have given themselves a bad name. And that's not just private landlords. I mean, some housing associations, and in the past some local authorities, have really not come up to the game. So there's a long way to go in improving standards right across whatever sector it is. And the Housing Ombudsman's been pretty clear about that over the last few weeks.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Interesting to talk to you both about that important issue. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Taylor Swift backs Kamala Harris. Her Instagram post was huge news for the campaign. But there are really many Republican Swifties who might now shake it off. We are talking celebrity endorsements later in the programme. And she said his rallies were boring. He said immigrants are eating pets. But who won the first presidential debate? Hello, welcome back. Well, last night was the big presidential debate, and wow, they really don't like each other at all, do they? Kamala Harris said people left Trump rallies early because they're bored, and at one point, Donald Trump claimed that migrants eat pets. Well, the Snap poll suggests it was a win for Harris, but Trump disputes the polls. He called in to Fox and Friends afterwards and declared it was his best ever debate and that he won it by a lot.
I won the debate according to C-SPAN by a lot. According to every single, I think we had 14 polls that we sent to you. Everyone had me winning. We had a terrible network. I think they were terrible. They should be embarrassed. I mean, they kept correcting me, and what I said was largely right, or I hope it was right. But what they said was absolutely wrong. The other, what she said, and they refused to correct. I even complained a couple of times. Why aren't you correcting them?
Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone is in Philadelphia for us. Donald Trump's spinning continuing this morning then.
Yeah, it certainly is. That poll he referenced there, the C-SPAN poll, was one taken on Twitter, on X. It is not the usual way that pollsters would conduct their own polls, very unscientific, but that one certainly did suggest that Donald Trump had a much better night. But, you know, Twitter's algorithms work in particular ways, and when you look more broadly at the polls, overwhelmingly, they do point to Kamala Harris, to the public polled, believing that Kamala Harris had the much better night. But Sophie, as you and I well know, polls are complex, and when you drill down, then they give you different things. They tell you different things depending on the questions that people were asked. And it is still the case that while overall people think that Kamala Harris had the better night, and let's remember that everyone knows what Donald Trump represents, whether you love it or hate it. Kamala Harris is a not nearly as well known a character, but drill down, and it is clear that still a majority of Americans believe that on things like the economy, like immigration, the key issues that matter to voters, they believe Donald Trump has a better handle on those. So that is why the polling and this election is still so close. But it was an extraordinary night. We watched every moment of it from the spin room. We saw as Donald Trump came into the spin room a few blocks away from the debate hall itself. He travelled to the spin room. It hadn't been swept by the Secret Service. It didn't matter for him last night. And for me, it was telling that he had to come to do his own top spinning. That suggests certainly it was not a great night. I spoke to Lara Trump, his daughter-in-law, a central figure in Team Trump. She said it was a fine night. A fine night, I said. Surely you would want to come here and tell everyone that your principal had a great night. She couldn't do that. So I think on the top line issues, this was Kamala Harris's night for sure.
And Mark, talk to me about migrants eating pets. What on earth is going on?
Well, before we do that, have a listen to that particular clip of Donald Trump talking about migrant eating pets.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
OK, so he is talking about the small town of Springfield, Ohio, where some rumours circulated, some conspiracy theories circulated about a week ago, which were then posted online by Don Jr., Donald Trump's son, by his running mate, J.D. Vance, suggesting that Haitian migrants in that town are killing pets, dogs, cats, and geese, apparently, as well, and eating them. We should tell you that the officials, the city officials there in Springfield, have said there is absolutely no evidence of this at all. There was, in fact, an arrest last week of a woman who had killed and apparently eaten a cat. She is not Haitian. She was born not in Springfield, but in another town very nearby. It shows you just how much this nonsense spreads online, but it is now being picked up by the principal himself, by Donald Trump. There's a serious point behind this, though. No, Haitian migrants are not eating dogs and cats, but yes, there are a lot of Haitian migrants in Springfield, and for many in Springfield, that is a concern. It goes back to that issue of immigration, which many people in this country fear has got out of control.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there for us in Philadelphia. Well, coverage of the debate is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. Still to come on the Politics Hub. She's broken her silence and endorsed Kamala Harris, but have the Democrats already secured the childless cat lady vote after Taylor Swift's intervention? We're talking political endorsements. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, we'll hear from the man whose murder conviction was quashed today after 33 years. Oliver Campbell spent 11 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. We'll speak to him and the lawyer who spent more than 2 decades fighting to clear his name. That and much more to come on the UK Tonight at 8.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now let's stick with the all-important debate across the pond, because within an hour of the show wrapping up, the most famous woman in the world broke her silence and came out for Kamala Harris. In a post on Instagram, which has already got over 8 million likes, Taylor Swift wrote, "Like many of you, I watched the debate tonight. If you haven't already, now is a great time to do your research on the issues at hand and the stances these candidates take on the topics that matter to you most." She goes on to say, "I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris." And you can see there, she's clutching her cat in that picture. She signs off as a childless cat lady. So a bit of a reference there to Donald Trump's running mate who criticised childless cat ladies. Now, I think the big question now is, we're sure that all this won't go down bad for the megastar Taylor or the Democrats, but it did get us thinking about the times when celebrity endorsements may not have quite gone to plan. Some of the examples that we thought about were Ginger Spice, Jerry Halliwell. She publicly backed the Labour Party, starring one of the party's election broadcasts, but then she was found to have not actually registered to vote at all. Whoopsie. Another one, not quite so successful celebrity attachment for Labour, came in 2015. The former leader of the party, Ed Miliband, said he regrets giving an interview to Russell Brand during that general election campaign, perhaps not the celebrity endorsement that people will be looking for now. And Kate Bush caused a right fuss among some of her left-leaning fans in 2016 after an interview which implied she was a Conservative backer. She later clarified she wasn't actually a Tory. Right, let's bring in Lord Blunkett and Andrea Leadsom, shall we? Celebrity endorsements. I mean, I remember New Labour, they had an awful lot of celebrity endorsements. Did you think it...
Cool Britannia.
Cool Britannia.
Wasn't it?
No, I don't think it made a ha'porth of difference. I don't think Taylor Swift's endorsement, Kamala, will make any difference in the swing states at all. I mean, I heard a bizarre one the other day that Gary Barlow was endorsing a particular wine and somebody who was tasting it said it was revolting. So these things can backfire, can't they, rather easily. On a more serious and dangerous note, I've been learning that RT, Russia Today, have, through various means, been sponsoring so-called influencers to put podcasts out which are dangerous to the American election. So there's a dangerous side to this as well. Being paid tens of thousands. to do so.
That's true, actually, isn't it? You're kind of thinking about people, influencers who actually get paid to promote posts on. It's a whole other world, doesn't it? I'll be honest, part of me does think, do people almost get a bit put off by celebrities telling us what to think about politics? Well, why should someone's opinion matter more because they're great at singing or whatever it is compared to the person down your local pub?
I mean, I guess there is just that. If you look up to someone, if they're a bit of a role model, people like, David Beckham's endorsed different things, and you had some fantastic campaigns on school meals. So it very, very rarely is it actually endorsing a person. It's more often endorsing a particular campaign. And I think a lot of celebrities have been very successful in forcing something into the spotlight. But I agree with David that endorsing a candidate, particularly a US presidential candidate, that seems an extraordinary thing to use your brand and your image to try and do.
Mm-hmm. The only thing that they can do that would be beneficial is to persuade people to vote. And that would be a very positive thing to do.
Yeah, that is true. All the kind of tweeting and stuff around the kind of election days and all that kind of thing. Just talking more widely about the US election, who's your money on? Who do you think is going to win, Andrea?
Oh,
it's quite hard to call, isn't it? It's hard.
Very hard to call. So, I mean, I would guess Kamala Harris is really in with a chance, which would be fantastic. First female president, be absolutely amazing.
So you'd like to see Kamala Harris win then?
I was then going to say, on the other hand, I do always think that actually Donald Trump, whether you like him or loathe him, is a potentially very unpredictable character. And in an unstable world, that unpredictability could be an asset.
I thought I was going to endorse Andrea as a rational Tory until she said that. I mean,
Don't give up on me yet, David.
My view is that we're often wishful thinking. I hear an enormous amount of wishful thinking from all branches of the media. And I think, hang on, have you been really close to people on the ground who are weighing up entirely different things to those of us who are involved in politics?
What do you think? What's the reality?
I think the reality is it's too close. I mean, I think it'll be really close. And I think because it's down with their crazy system, it's completely out of date. 7 states making all the difference. Well, the complete difference. You're down to a few thousand votes. And that is... the world's hanging on it. She could win, as, of course, Hillary did, by 3-4 million votes across the country and still lose.
Thanks both very much. A very wide-ranging discussion. Really good to have you on the programme today. Thank you. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then, of course, at 9 p.m, it is The World with Yada Hakeem, with, I'm sure, more reaction to what we've just been talking about, that US debate. And, of course, we'll have lots more UK politics here on the Politics Hub tomorrow. I'll see you then.